All right. Welcome to the Post-Socialist Comparative Memory Studies seminar series organized by the PoSoCoMeS Interest Group of the Memory Studies Association. My name is Katja Haskins. I'm one of the organizers of the seminars, and today I will also play the role of host and discussant. At this seminar, we will be discussing Mischa Gabowitsch and Mykola Homanyuk's book, Monuments and Territory, War Memorials in Russian-Occupied Ukraine, published very recently by the Central European University Press. So I'm going to introduce the authors, the discussants, and then give the floor to Mischa and Mykola, after which we will go to the discussants' remarks and questions, followed by the authors' responses, and then invite everyone to pose their questions. And you can do so directly or in the chat. We will adjourn around 7 p.m. Central Eastern Time, and the conversation is being recorded, so you can watch it at your leisure should you have to leave earlier. So without further delay, let me introduce the panelists. Mischa Gabowitsch, a historian and sociologist, is professor of multilingual and transnational post-Soviet studies at Johannes Gutenberg University Mainz, Germany. He holds a BA and MA from the University of Oxford and DEA and PhD from the School of Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences in Paris, and previously held positions at the Universities of Princeton and Vienna, as well as the Einstein Forum in Potsdam, in addition to visiting fellowships at Institutes of Advanced Study in Madrid and Vienna. He's the author, editor, or co-editor of numerous books and thematic journal issues in various languages on protest and social movements, as well as memory and commemoration. These include in English, The Russian Field, Views from Abroad, 2011, Protest in Putin's Russia, 2016, Replicating Atonement, Foreign Models in the Commemoration of Atrocities, 2017, The Sociology of Belarusian Protest, 2021, Beyond Representation, The Visual Analysis of History Textbooks, and Other Educational Media, 2023, and Protest and Authoritarian Reaction in Belarus, 2023. Mykola Homanyuk, sociologist, geographer, and theater maker, is an associate professor at Kherson State University. He graduated from Krupskaya Kherson State Pedagogical Institute and defended his PhD thesis in sociology at Karazin Kharkiv National University. He has held a Lane Kirkland Fellowship at Maria Curie Sklodowska University in Lublin, a fellowship at the Indiana University Ukraine Non-Residential Scholars Program, and a fellowship at Petro Yatsyk Non-Resident Scholars Program at the University of Toronto. Since 2022, he has been a member of the Prisma Ukraina War, Migration, and Memory Research Group at Forum Transregional Studien, and a member of the Contested Ukraine, Military Patriotism, Russian Influence, and Implications for European Security Research Group. Mykola is the author of numerous articles on mental mapping and toponymy, ethnic studies, as well as memory and command. As a theater maker, he runs the Kherson Theater Lab and directs documentary theater productions. In 2018, he was awarded the Adami Media Prize for Cultural Diversity in Eastern Europe. And somewhat short introduction for our discussants. Welcome Yuliya Yurchuk, who is an associate professor at Södertörn University of Sweden. She is a historian specializing in nationalism, memory, religion, history of knowledge, and history of science and ideas, with the main focus on Ukraine, Eastern, and Central Europe. And yours truly, I'm a professor in the Department of Communication, Arts, and Sciences at Pennsylvania State University and State College, Pennsylvania. My expertise is in rhetoric, visual culture, and transnational memory studies. So now I will give the floor to our authors. Welcome.
Thank you. We decided that Mykola would start talking about how we wrote the book, and then I can chime in and maybe add a few things.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor for me to be here with you today. What sparked the idea for this book? Actually, I will start with the beginning. On February 24, I was in a night train when I was traveling from Kiev to Kherson, my city, and in the sunrise, I watched first how the airport in Mykola burned, and how the airport in Kherson burned, and when how huge number of people live in the city, I mean city of Kherson. But I decided to stay at home for many reasons. Of course, from the first days, my friends and colleagues from all the world started to write me, started to call me, offering help. And one of those people was Mischa Gabowitsch. And that was a starting point of our book, this first message via Facebook or Telegram. And for us, it was obvious that from the first days, maybe first weeks of the full-scale invasion, the occupiers began to pay an extremely high level of attention to memorials in the occupied territories. And it was felt that this was not improvisation, although improvisation did take place also. Therefore, it was important for us, let's say, to reproduce the content of documents that historians and maybe judges will not see soon. I mean, the documents on how to deal with memorials in the occupied territory. And such documents existed because the Russians invaders were armed not only with cannons and guns and other similar stuff, but also with victory banners, with mobile eternal flames, with ceremonial uniforms for honor guards. And memorials became the place, the stage, the background where these symbolic weapons were actively used. And I don't know about how we did manage to reach our aim. I think today we will know about it. And I am sure that Mischa also add something about the story, how we start our collaboration, how we start our book.
So I would add that before February 2022, we had only spoken on Zoom once, because both Mykola and I were working on Soviet war memorials in different contexts, especially in provincial areas of various post-Soviet countries. And he had read one of my articles about this and just contacted me. So we had one conversation. And then when we got back in touch, immediately after the full-scale invasion, actually Kherson was already under occupation. The Russians had just arrived. And one of the ideas, or the first idea that Mykola proposed, was that we should organize something like an intellectual airlift for members of Kherson State University who were stuck, in occupied Kherson, but who wanted to continue their educational and research process in Ukrainian. So the first thing we did together was that we organized what we called an academic bridge, where for a 10-day marathon of online lectures, we invited people from all over the world, Ukrainians, Kazakh scholars, Americans, Germans, to give lectures in Ukrainian or English for the teaching staff and students of Kherson State University, which I think emotionally was very important for them, but certainly also for me to be able to feel that I'm actually contributing something meaningful. And then we continued talking, and as Mykola said, we realized that there are these really interesting things going on in terms of interaction with war memorials on the ground. And initially, the idea was that we would just be writing an article about this, right? So we decided to collect material, and Mykola, of course, being on the ground in occupied Kherson, really did the bulk of collecting the empirical material. And my role, I think, in those early stages was mostly to help him simply save these sources, because, of course, it was not safe for him to keep all this material on his devices, especially on his mobile phone, because he could be stopped and searched anytime. So he would, collect things about Kherson, about the region, but also on other Ukrainian regions that had been occupied. And I would just save everything. And then later we started going through this material together and seeing what kinds of patterns emerge. And that's when quite quickly we realized that there was so many interesting sources, but also so many different interesting angles, so many different analytical perspectives that really this would have to be a book rather than an article. And that's how this book came into being.
Yeah, that's quite a story. That's pretty amazing. And I think that the book's contents do reflect the richness of the perspectives that you bring to the study, because there's not just discussion of monuments and their history or what the occupiers did with them, but on the ground, but also the history of how these monuments were being taken care of by local people, how during the war, which is of course ongoing, we have multiple media using monuments as props for propaganda, right? And different reactions in the three parts of Ukraine, in Russia. I mean, it's a real kind of kaleidoscopic scope of a study that is really, really rich. So anything else you would like to mention before we move on to discussion? I mean, there's so much to talk about, really.
Maybe we should just mention that the book is available in open access, so you can download it from CEU Press's website, but also any number of other repositories and websites.
Yes, and that's a tremendous thing for a lot of people who don't have access to university libraries. But even if you can read it online, if you are affiliated with the university, please do ask your library to get a hard copy. That keeps multiple copies, keep records safe. That's like one of the primary archival principles. And we overinvest into information technologies and electronic media, but then we forget that paper is actually perhaps more durable. So we can jump to my remarks and questions. And I certainly wanted to acknowledge that this is a gift, first of all, in the literal sense, because it's available in online access. And it's also like a welcome practice that allows an exchange of ideas, especially in a topic like that and a historical moment that we're in. It is a gift in many other ways. The authors have gifted us their expertise and countless hours of intellectual and emotional labor at a time when many of us who are affected by the war directly or indirectly often do not have the energy to contemplate theoretical and historical matters. And Mykola in particular did so behind the enemy lines. And this is, I think, a rare act of courage and dedication. And of course, the book's chapters offer a wealth of insight, combining theoretical breadth and depth with at once panoramic and intimate look at the way monuments have figured in this biggest land war in Europe since World War II. So it is at once a completely researched and detailed study. And this too is a rare in scholarly treatments of the topic of monuments. So I do invite you to browse the book's table of contents to get a sense of how much territory the book actually covers, from the theoretical argument that introduces the concepts of monumentscape and collective biography of monuments, to the chapters that reconstruct this monumentscape and collective biography in vivid detail. The authors even go beyond Ukrainian borders to show how the monument war has been playing out in Russian monumentscape. And finally, the authors leave us with a provocative invitation to think about the future of these monuments from several vantage points beyond immediate political meanings. And finally, I should, of course, mention that this book is very clearly and compellingly written, which I'm sure will enhance its appeal and accessibility to a broad reading audience. And I hope that there are plans to translate this into multiple languages as well. Let me pivot to my questions now. First of all, a more meta question. I'm curious to hear more about the connection between your research methods, which include digital ethnography, print media analysis, and fieldwork, and the theoretical framework you develop, in particular, the notions of monumentscape and collective biography. What were your initial theoretical assumptions going into this research, and did you modify them? And if so, at what point? So that's my first question. And if you have time, I have a more kind of case study related question, which emerged for me after reading chapter 2, where you detail local practices of interacting with and altering war monuments, most of them located in smaller rural towns and villages. This chapter offers insight into what made these monuments resilient against the occupiers and what can possibly spare them later when the Russian invasion is history. So how does the kind of on-the-ground perspective that shows us community investment into maintaining and protecting these memorials to the local war dead, essentially, how does this mesh with the concepts of monumentscape and collective biography? Is there a tension perhaps between the sort of the panoramic or aerial view of the monumentscape and this often idiosyncratic kind of domesticated shrine on the ground? So these are my two questions, and feel free to answer both of them or at least one of them. Thank you.
Would you like us to answer those questions first, or listen to Yuliya first, and then
maybe you can go ahead because
yes.
I have quite different questions and you might just forget. So go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
Mykola, would you like to start?
After you.
Okay, so just briefly, because you mentioned translations, we don't really have any specific plans so far to have the book translated. There have been a few interviews and talks in various languages. So Mykola presented the book in Lviv in Ukrainian. I gave a talk in German, but we haven't been approached by anyone about translation. So if anyone is interested, please let us know and we can talk about it. So to start with your meta question about the link between the research methods and the theoretical framework, I mean, I guess the thing to say here is that we are both very empirical researchers, right? So we're both interested in ethnographic methods and in sort of collecting information on the ground. And in addition, Mykola is an expert in geography and mental geography in particular. So he's done really interesting work on how people navigate space using, for example, monuments, but also other objects in space. And I have a historical interest, so I've also done a lot of archival work, also very empirical, on the history of war memorials. Right? So I guess we both start very much from the ground up and sort of develop our theoretical approaches from the material. And I mean, I can only speak for myself, I guess, but my theoretical assumptions from the beginning, I think, were that monuments and war memorials in particular have biographies, so their meanings change over time. And the fact that two memorials outwardly look similar doesn't mean that their meaning for people who interact with them is also the same, right? So that's something that was already very clear to me because I've done a lot of both historical and ethnographic work on, for example, Victory Day celebrations around war memorials, doing interviews with people, drawing maps, taking photos, etc. So that's something that was kind of important to me from the very beginning. And I think working together was a good way to really get a very fine-grained sense of the monumentscape in Ukraine in particular, right? And I think we both were very aware from the beginning of our work that there are just lots and lots and lots of these war memorials, right? And one point that we always make in these discussions is that very often when you read books about monuments and war memorials, people just take a few well-known examples, especially big, large-scale memorials in well-known public spaces, say something about them, and then generalize, right? But we know, of course, and I think Yuliya's book on the Volhynian region is an excellent example of how this can be done differently, where she also looked in a very fine-grained case study at what actually happens in a particular region when you take all the different monuments into account, including rural areas, the different hybrid ways in which people interact with them, and you find sometimes very unexpected ways of doing so, which don't necessarily correspond to large meta-narratives that are often proclaimed to be polarizing. For example, debates about the politics of history in Ukraine. So I think we kind of developed this concept of a monumentscape to really do justice to this diversity that we continuously find in our empirical material. And to answer the second question about how the bottom-up perspective meshes with this idea of a monumentscape, I mean, I don't think that the idea of a monumentscape is actually an aerial view. I don't think it's a top-down view. Actually, maybe to the contrary, it's an attempt to sort of draw a particular map of a territory from, you know, a very down-to-earth experience, right? So starting like almost a kind of Google Street View experience, rather than coming from, you know, a satellite view and zooming in, right? So we sort of constantly find example after example of very interesting and very different and diverse individual ways of interacting with war memorials, both, you know, in Ukraine originally and then also after the start of the occupation. And we sort of start drawing this monumentscape and start writing the collective biography coming from this bottom-up view. So that's maybe my first response.
I could add some remarks. First of all, concerning the empirical data collection, we used many sources, as Mischa mentioned, on-site observation, Telegram channels and other web sources, interviews with authorities, of course, Russian propagandistic newspapers, leaflets, billboards, and other such stuff. Concerning the field work and on-site observation, we used, figuratively speaking, archaeological approach when material remains of commemorative practices are exploited. I mean, different inscriptions on refs, candles, candies, items with religious symbols, different type of modification. So it's like an archaeology, and reproducing what had happened there, possible meaning of this event based on this observation of remains is a core of this approach. Why we did use this approach? Because it's question of security. It's impossible to make pictures and to interview people during the commemorial events because it will be immediately arrested. And time to time, I need to explore remains of commemorial events to understand the meaning of what had happened there. About second question about importance of rural perspective. I think that the rural areas are kind of reserve of memory, or kind of laboratory of memory. And as Mischa said, memorials in the capitals and large city are always in the center of attention, and also the center of ideological attention, ideological control, ideological pressure, and then bigger distance from the administrative center to the settlement, then less ideological control, both from the state institution and from the memory activist. And then bigger distance from the administrative center, the more correctly memory space, monument space, more correctly reflects the opinion, let's say memory conscience of ordinary residents of the communities. And this is very important for us.
And I would add maybe that this is really a long-term thing, right? So to give another example from the Soviet period, there's this idea that there were no Holocaust memorials in the Soviet Union because most people know that attempts to have one built at the Babin Yar execution site in Kyiv were thwarted by the Soviet authorities. So the only example of a memorial in a relatively central location in a big Republican capital is the one in Minsk from 1947. But then Arkady Zeltser, a historian who works at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, wrote an amazing book where he smaller villages, precisely logistic was no less ideological, less strictly, less tightly policed. And for local residents, for example, Holocaust survivors, family members, etc., it was often much easier to organize the process of having a memorial built because they knew the head of the local executive committee, because they collected money themselves, they got organized, they built this thing, and there was just, they were less in the spotlight. So this is not something that is true just of, Ukraine's recent history, but it's something that goes back very far, and I think applies even beyond the Soviet and post-Soviet context to many other countries.
Yeah, this is really helpful, and I kept thinking about your discussion or narrative about how the invaders had this idea that Soviet World War II memorials had been demolished or mistreated, and they found these well-kept shrines, even though many of them were kind of more do-it-yourself kinds with the the bathroom tiling, etc. So, and also like I wondered whether it was more appealing for the occupiers to choose to like as photo ops a grander scale monuments rather than something small and more intimate looking in the countryside. Was there some kind of rationale they had to highlight certain memorials and not others?
I mean, I think that in the case of the occupied territories, especially during the first months, and our book focuses on the first year of the occupation, they really took whatever they could get. Partly because they had such a weak sense of local context that very often, as we describe in our book, they got all the information about the monuments wrong. They got confused between, towns and villages. They talked about a monument that was in one location, presenting it as if it was in a different location. So I think, whenever they found anything that looked sort of vaguely familiar and usable to them, they use that especially in the visual propaganda that we analyze, right? So as backdrops for ceremonies, rituals, whatever, giving people medals or Victory Day celebrations. So very often you can actually see from the videos that we analyzed that they had no idea what this monument was about, what the place was even called where they were standing. But they were talking, quite pompously about this great Soviet war memorial that now finally is being renovated and restored because Russia is back here.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's go to Yuliya.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And indeed, as Katja said, it was a gift to read the book, and this is a gift to everyone who is interested not only in memories, memory culture, but also what is going on the occupied territories, because we know so little about it. And you really gave us the picture what is going on, and especially for the scholars of memory, it's like both ends, this occupied territories, the people living there, and what is going on with the monuments there. So thank you very much, and I really agree that this like rural areas and the farther from the center, the more interesting everything gets. So thank you also for this. And my questions are a little bit more conceptual, because when I was reading the book, I was also thinking about some questions which I myself. Coping with, I would say. And this is like, first of all, this concept you use iconoclasm and heritage. And I'm just wondering how we approach these situations where we use this word iconoclasm, and because this is such an established concept. But when we have this context and situations when the heritage itself changes or transform its meaning, and then there is no this part of this icon, like the heritage doesn't have the meaning which was inscribed when it was created. And speaking about this collective biography, I would say, like, if we see this through history, so we see this beginning of the life of the memorial, and this meaning which was inscribed into this, and then it transforms and sometimes maybe disappears. So my first question would be about this kind of, can we speak about iconoclasm when we have the situation when maybe the monuments lose this meaning of the icon, of meaning of the heritage, and maybe then we need some other concepts. And I don't really have any to suggest, but I thought about like maybe some deheritization when it kind of you lose this kind of inscribed meaning, you transform the meaning, and then you have some totally different process going on, which is not really the heritage. And then how you approach it, because I think that this is what we think we can think about when we see different uses of this heritage, when like this Russian propaganda claims something else, and they kind of proclaim it that it's like iconoclasm, as Ukrainians deal with these monuments. So this is the first question I wanted to raise.
You want us to respond to this first before you get to your questions? Mykola, any thoughts?
It's very interesting thoughts. And what I just thought about, because the definition, the iconoclasm is related to icons, to some religion content, and in many our cases. In many our cases, we deal with modification of monuments, and one of this type of modifications is installing of religious elements like crosses, candle holders, and icons as well. And in this sense, iconoclasm, it's very close, like direct meaning of related to monuments, because of religious context of monuments. And in this case, iconoclasm fits to our research, our approaches, because many war memorials have gotten additional religious meaning, and this is why I suppose this iconoclasm is correct word for our words. About heritage, deheritization, actually, it's also interesting things, and I think this approach, without using this word, deheritization, time to time use Ukrainian, or not Ukrainian, all type of activists, just to justify their actions, their activities, and it is in our conclusion that we propose to see on war memorials from different perspectives, not only political, the main perspective, but also by cultural, by heritage, by habitual, by aesthetic, and according to practical aims. For me, it's my personal point of view, we need to find more things, more concepts, how to protect not find the justification how to destroy them. Maybe I'm went beyond the topic of our book and our conversation. It's my just point of view.
So I would add that actually I read quite a lot of the literature on iconoclasm while we were working on this book. Um, Alain Besançon has a huge book on the intellectual history of iconoclasm. But the one book that I found perhaps most productive for thinking about our case is a relatively short book by Aaron Tugendhaft called The Idols of Isis from, I think, 2020, where he talks about different cases of iconoclasm throughout the ages, from the ancient Assyrians to ISIS. What's interesting is that there is a kind of classical version of iconoclasm, which is rooted in a sort of general mistrust of any kind of politics through images, right? So that is something that's very strong in Islam. That was part of the point of the Byzantine iconoclast. So this is not what's happening here in the Russian-Ukrainian case. But I think there are some interesting parallels between this kind of iconoclasm and other instances of iconoclasm that one knows from other periods, which is that, first of all iconoclasts try to kind of restore a state of original purity. And this is something that I think very much applies to what the Russians tried to do in occupied Ukraine, right? So in whatever biblical cases, Moses, and then for Muhammad in Islam, it was all about, people are creating idols through visual representation, which are sort of falsifying the ultimate truth. And here it's about the Ukrainian nationalists in Russian parlance are modifying and kind of changing the original purity of the Soviet representation of historical truth. So we need to come in and revert things back to how they used to be. But like almost all iconoclasts throughout the ages, when they try to do that, when they try to sort of re-Sovietize the memorials in Ukraine, they end up actually creating something new instead of just, what they used to look like. So, Mykola mentioned these mobile or temporary eternal flames, which are a particularly egregious example because they come in and they say the evil Ukrainians have extinguished the eternal flames in places where actually no eternal flames ever existed. So they come with, mobile temporary gas sources to light them. But the other thing that I loved about Tugendhaft's book is that he talks about how iconoclasts really, since ancient times, were always very interested in kind of producing images of themselves destroying images. Right? So what's important about the iconoclastic act very often is not simply to obliterate all images, but it's to show yourself in the process of destroying the wrong kinds of images. And this is such an important part of our material, right? So the Russians come in and they start producing thousands and thousands of videos and photos where they show themselves destroying, for example, monuments to the Ukrainian anti-terrorist operation against Russia since 2014, or other kinds of Ukrainian symbols that they're ripping down from Soviet war memorials or from other kinds of memorials. So this, I think, links them to iconoclasts and other times and places, which is why I think the concept continues to be fruitful. But other than that, I would very much second what Mykola said, which is that it's important, I think, to be aware of all the different ways in which people engage with monuments and with war memorials in particular. So, the question of representation and iconicity and iconoclasm is one way of engaging with monuments. The idea of heritage, which includes deheritagization, is another one, which kind of engages with them as objects that represent something historical and that have, whose materiality has value because of its history and because it refers to something in the past. But then there are all these other ways that we have found that we describe in the book, which have to do, for example, with relating to monuments as markers of family history, of local community, etc. And I think that in order to really gain a meaningful understanding of the significance of these memorials, we always have to take all these meanings into account. And ideally, whenever there's a discussion about what to do with the memorial, obviously it's not our place to legislate on what should happen, but I think it's important for people in a local community to have all these different aspects heard. And to me personally, that process is really more important than what ultimately happens with the monument. Whether in the end they decide that, having discussed all this, we want to get rid of it, or we want to modify it, or we want to keep it, I think is less important than this whole process of discussion. And I think here, we are in agreement with people like James E. Young, who's written about Holocaust memorials, and many others who have pointed out that really the process of discussion that leads to the creation of a monument, but also, its continued uses, is at least as important as what it looks like.
Thank you, and you succeeded to show this complexity of engagement on different levels. And you also cite Julie de Chaper, who really shows this and you show this continuity from the Soviet times of this preservation, conservation, when Soviet authorities sometimes came and just destroyed in order to build something new and claim that this is a restoration in a way. So this was also very interesting to read. For those of you who haven't read the book, I really recommend to go into this. And my another question about concepts, and this is again something what I myself struggle with. It's how you use the concept of propaganda. And this is very interesting because, just today when I was thinking about this question, should I ask you or not? But then I read again what I wanted to say. And I just think that I will just pose this question anyway, because for me, even the way you use it, you very often say like Russian propaganda, and it goes like this like two words together, and then you have this sub-chapter Ukrainian propaganda, and then you don't repeat Ukrainian propaganda as often, and and this is how like I also thought like, because when we use the word propaganda, we kind of see that okay, then both sides use history in their own wrong ways, and that is why everything is propaganda and in a way equally wrong. You know what I mean? And that is why I just wondered how you use this word like a concept, because you don't really explain what this word means for you. And as I said, even in your usage, you still don't use so much this like two words Ukrainian propaganda. It's only in the subtitle. So I think that you even like maybe not intentionally, but you still see the difference, but still you use the same word. So I wonder how you for yourself explained how you use it.
Propaganda, we use propaganda in a neutral way, despite of propaganda is word propaganda has a negative connotation, but it's just one of the means how to influence or pursue an audience, people. And as you said, as you notice, we use not only definition Russian propaganda and Ukrainian propaganda as well, but the number of Russia propaganda in occupied territories much higher, and it's quite simple explanation of why we use Russian propaganda more than Ukrainian.
Yeah. So we did discuss this when we were writing the book, but I do think that the way in which we use it um, doesn't imply, as you did, I think, that propaganda is wrong. It's not a judgment. I think it's more about how information is disseminated, right? So, for example, as researchers, when we engage with the topic, obviously, we approach it full of doubts and questions and kind of a readiness and willingness to change our point of view. But then there is a different mode, which is the propagandistic mode, and which, even we as scholars are very often, I think, forced to engage with when we're advertising our books and we want to get people to cite us, etc., which is that instead of being self-questioning, we just want to spread a certain point of view as widely as possible. And I think, that's certainly the way in which it was used in Soviet discourse. And Soviet discourse distinguished between propaganda and agitation, right? So propaganda was spreading a point of view, agitation was trying to get people to do something, right? And in that sense, I think, we do look at propaganda on both sides, noting the differences, especially in the chapter on visual propaganda. We try to understand how this is structured differently on both sides. And, once again, I would agree with Mykola that the main reason why we don't speak about Ukrainian propaganda as often is that simply in our sources, which are about the occupied territories, there is so much more Russian propaganda that we looked at, that there is Ukrainian propaganda.
Yeah, but your the sub-chapters are equally long, but the use of words is different. So it's just my observation. It's not critique, but it's interesting how we use the concept. But thank you. I think that I understand how you use it. And my next question is more, I think, more general, and this is something what maybe is interesting for all of us to think about, because I generally think about the use of the past by Russia and in this case Russians in the occupied territories, because I even read, I don't know whether it's a fact, but I read that the most common accusation that the young people get when they get arrested for this pro-Ukrainian agitation, let's say like this, is exactly because of some kind of abuse of the monument. So I think that Mykola, while doing this field work, it was really risky, it was really dangerous. And Mykola, you did the amazing work that you did it. But thinking about it, how these accusations are even used, just to arrest people, to prosecute people, I just really wanted to emphasize the importance of your work, that this is not only about the monuments, it's about the people, right? And how easily this monumental stuff we are dealing with can be used against the people and really destroying their lives. And here I come to some other observations that on the occupied territories, these occupational authorities come with new museums, for instance, museums of history. And I just also was amazed by some information on the Museum of History in Melitopol, for instance, and they are such a big scale museums, that shows that the history is such an important thing. And I wonder how you would explain this kind of trend. Why is it so important? And is it really, because when we read about all this history in Russia, why it matters that it substitutes ideology in a way. So what would be your explanation? And would you say that there is some difference how the history is used on the occupied territories and in Russia per se? And also, if it is ideology, then what are these building blocks of this ideology, and why it sells so well? So this is something maybe very general, but I think that for our group, it's something what we all maybe can think about, because as I said, it's not about only monuments, it's about the people, and here we come to so many questions.
Thank you for your question. I have also general answer. I think Russian regime use history, use vitamin of history for substitution of something very important, or just important things. I think maybe lack of freedom, of lack of social life, maybe, or lack of just simple goods, maybe, even if we talk about remote areas, not about large cities. And vitamin of honor, vitamin of proud, vitamin of history is one of the treatment, figuratively speaking, and treatment, or not treatment, it's substitution of lacking on something very important, from very important values to many important but not special things. It's my general question about, but what else? What the second part of your question? I just
the difference between the uses of the past in Russia percent in the occupied territories.
Actually, Russia tend to make a balance between history approaches, history in Russia territory, in the mainland Russian occupied Ukraine part of Russia, according to Russian point of view, just to make a balance, to install a new version of Russian history in occupied territory, using all narratives, using imperial heritage narrative, colonial narratives, and that's all. I think my explanation is too simple. Maybe Mischa will add something more valuable.
I lost my connection there for maybe half a minute, so I missed part of Mykola's answer, but I would add a few things. So first of all, I mean, it's very often said that the main reason we are all so interested in memory these days is that we've lost a vision for the future, right? So there used to be all these great progressive projects, socialist, liberal, etc. And once that collapsed, partly with the collapse of the Soviet Union, but also other factors, people turned to the past. And I think what we see in Russia is an extreme version of that, right? Precisely because the Soviet Union had declared itself the kind of international vanguard of progress. When that was lost, I think it became especially tempting for a lot of people to turn to the past and to use it as justification, for example, for imperial reconquest, because it's all about past imperial greatness. But another aspect that I would add, and this goes partly to the question of continuity between Russia and the occupied territories, is bureaucracy. Because I think once the Russian leadership decided to invest into history, for example, with the creation of the Russian Military Historical Society in 2012, that became in part kind of a self-perpetuating process. So if you look at some of the initiatives that are going on in the occupied territories, you see that, for example, they're starting to open branches of these Russia My History multimedia theme parks, right? Which have been created in, I don't know, 16 places, I think, all over Russia, and now are also being expanded into the occupied parts of Ukraine. There are sculptors in Moscow who have presented visions for gigantic victory monuments to be placed in different parts of Ukraine, both those already under Russian control and even places like Odessa that they're only hoping to conquer one day. So there's kind of a push and interest from bureaucratic structures, from people who profit from this, who make money, a lot of money from building monuments and other structures. So I think these two things are coming together. You have kind of a new maybe class of people who stand to benefit from really pushing this insistence on history, on imperial history, on history as justification. And I think that's one of the reasons why this has kind of gotten a momentum of its own.
Thank you. And I think that Katya's book shows very well also how Russia uses the past to really conceal their crimes against their own citizens, and now against very, very important things we are doing. Yeah, and mainly this was all my questions, so we can maybe open the floor to others. We have still time for this if we are done with our questions.
Yes, please either show us your face and voice your question in person, or you can write it in the chat, and I will keep track of the questions in the chat. Thanks.
Maybe while others are thinking, I will ask one last question. And I think this is for Mykola, because Mykola, you are still on the ground, so to say. Would you say that something changes after you've done this field work, this first year of the occupation, of the full-scale invasion?
Yes, and we notice it in our book after the first year cycle of holidays. Russia's authorities, Russia's regime in occupied territories lost the big interest to monument scape in occupied territory. And now mostly local authorities are engaged in this activity. So there is no many big events with participating of high-level politicians like in the first year of invasion. There is no, I don't remember, a big memorials after opening the Могила monument, monument of Duke Alexander Nevsky in Mariupol. So Russia seriously lost the interest in, because there are many explanations, because they actually understood what is going on occupied territory and who live here there.
Yeah, if I may butt in, it was interesting to hear the story of post-occupation Kherson region, if I remember correctly, where there was a move on the part of Ukrainian activists or de-Russification activists to try to take down a local war memorial, but the local city council and really stood up and defended it. So that was an interesting detail that I think says a lot about the way that these monuments and smaller locations and smaller monuments live their lives, right? So it's a kind of a story of not just domestication of a World War II or Great Patriotic War memorial, but also collective emotional investment in it and material, I guess, because people do maintain it. So I guess I'm curious to hear your thoughts on just kind of like looking into the crystal ball. Will there be any modifications to the existing World War II memorials in the formerly occupied Ukraine? So if, all of the areas that have been occupied are deoccupied, how is this memorialization or memory culture going to change in your opinion? Or is it?
So that's actually an article that we're currently working on as a sequel to the book, where basically we look at how the memory and memorialization of the ongoing war is being articulated with the memorialization of the Second World War. And I mean, to simplify things a little bit, one could say that in the late Soviet Union and in present-day Russia, what happens is that all other mnemonic topics derive their legitimacy from the Great Patriotic War. So you constantly put monuments to other events, later events, next to a Great Patriotic War memorial to make them more legitimate. So, in the late 80s, for example, when Soviet soldiers who fought in Afghanistan started putting up the first monuments, very often they did so next to the Great Patriotic War memorials, because that war had more legitimacy than the war in Afghanistan. And that's something that continues in Russia. And in Ukraine, in part, it's now reversed, right? Because the Soviet type memorials for the Great Patriotic War have rapidly lost a lot of their legitimacy in the eyes of some people. So sometimes, in order to preserve them, in order to save them, people locally start putting memorials to the ongoing war next to them, or modifying the existing memorials by adding names of Ukrainian soldiers who have died fighting Russia, so that you produce a kind of continuity between we fought the fascists then and we're fighting the fascists now. So please don't touch this older memorial.
And this is actually what I recognize even from West Ukrainian towns and rural areas.
Yes, it's everywhere, in Western, Eastern Ukraine, and South Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of makes me think of the idea of sacredness, and although it does not necessarily figure as one of the key terms or concepts, but you allude to it in several different contexts, like the kind of the enmeshing of different practices, kind of syncretism, right? Where Soviet era symbolism can be augmented by things like crosses, right? So like elements of Christianity and elements of like the Soviet civic religion that become kind of hybridized in a way. So sacredness is something that is maybe has a relationship to the idea of iconoclasm, right? Because sacredness can be in the eye of the beholder, right? And so even a very modest local monument that may have been like remodeled, as we say in America, many times, where people use bathroom tiles to put around it. And I think that was kind of like one of the passages that kind of struck me, and I was like, where you cannot contemplate the sublime if you're standing on the tile that looks like your bathroom. I think that was the sentence, and I was like, maybe you can. And also like what is your relationship to this? Is the sublime the kind of the goal of a local memorial, or is it something else? So I think I kept thinking about this. I kept thinking and coming back to that idea of like what really makes these things alive for people and communities, and how this sort of vitality that is part of the relationship, right? It's not just the piece of rock in the landscape. It's a relationship between people who take care of it and make meaning of it, and this object, this plastic material object. So how is that going to I don't know, provide a new memoryscape or monumentscape for the post-war era? Maybe and like adding a crazy hope, perhaps, that how it might serve as a kind of common topos or a common beacon for people in Russia and Ukraine. I mean, I know that the idea of reconciliation of any kind seems pretty remote and perhaps unrealistic in the near future, but I was just kind of trying to throw some ideas about like sacredness, collective memory as a relationship to a local object. And yeah, just riffing.
Mykola, would you like to talk about
Yes,
hyperrealism? I think that has to do with it.
we use word hybridization in our book mostly, but syncretism is also we could apply with this hybridization. It's not contradictive.
I don't have a satisfactory answer, I think, to the question of sacredness, but Mykola keeps sending me these examples that he finds in different parts of Ukraine of hyper-realist monuments that are now emerging in connection with the ongoing war. And I find that really striking because there used to be a sense that in order for a monument or a memorial to be somehow sacred or sublime, there has to be some element of abstraction or magnification or something like that. And a lot of what we're seeing now, and this I think has to do with the bathroom tiles example, is that people are trying to stay as close to reality as possible. So there's no longer a clear dividing line between something you just happen to find in reality and a sublime monument. So I'm not actually sure what that will do to the notion of sacredness, because I do think that it's more difficult to have an experience of communication with the sacred when the object is very profane, is very sort of undistinguishable from what you encounter in your everyday life anyway. One of my follow-up projects is I'm currently working on a global history of eternal flames, and one of the case study actually I'm working on most actively is from interwar Latvia in the 1920s and 30s, where they didn't have eternal flames, they had sacred fires. That's what they called it. And it was a bit different from what we know from other contexts as eternal flames. But what's interesting is that they started out lighting them only on very, very special occasions, like anniversaries of very important battles, etc. And then, by the time of Ulmanis in the 1930s, to notion of being sacred and transcendent and special, when it becomes just almost a routine occurrence. So I don't know whether in this day and age when so many different people are involved in this monument building process, and it's become so easy to do it. You no longer need to have connections with whatever the party leadership in Kyiv. Whether monuments are still kind of repositories of the sacred, I don't know.
Maybe I can I can add some reflections, because this is something what I think about a lot, and what I think about this hyper-realism at present moment. I think that this is more about how people want to make this memory a part of their living environment more, and they don't want really to have this distance, because they live in this kind of present moment which doesn't pass, so to say. So this is kind of some radical presentism there that doesn't give space to representation. That is why we have this hyper realism in these memories. But I think that maybe it's a matter of time, actually, and I think that the memory of the current war will change, and this is something what we see now. This is very much this kind of part of the living environment, and then it will definitely change when we will have this post-war. And here we have question from Alexandra Gajanyan.
Yes, thanks for the book. Before I read it and possibly find the answer, one small question. Is the shape form of new monuments simply reproduces typos, Soviet patterns, or introduce something new, something more up to date according to new perceptions? And I don't know if this refers to new monuments that were installed by the occupiers, or does it refer to Ukrainian monuments, new Ukrainian monuments? I suspect that this is the Russian one, the Russian side.
I would say, regardless of what it's about.
Yes,
I mean,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. I'm talking. Yes, that's the question is about the new Russian monuments, and the word there was in Russian in my the tupoe reproducing, tupo reproducing.
Oh, tupo. Okay.
Tupo
Okay.
reproducing.
Bluntly. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
I think it's
I'd say
a question for Mischa mostly. What is going on in Russia with
No, I
monuments?
think he does mean the monuments that we found, the newly erected monuments in the occupied territories. But I mean, one thing I could repeat here is that very often they come in and they claim that they will reconstitute something Soviet, but they end up creating something new.
Oh,
right?
okay.
And there's a quite a variety of new things they create. I mean, sometimes we didn't show any images in this session, but I mean, the most sort of pompous example is this gigantic equestrian statue of Alexander Nevsky that they built in Mariupol, in the site of a very interesting monument to the Ukrainian anti-terrorist operation they previously destroyed immediately after occupying Mariupol. So that's one example of something that's, I mean, it's not exactly Soviet. It's more this sort of neo-realist historicism that you also find across Russia with monuments to figures from Russian imperial history. But then there are all these cases of trying to recreate something Soviet based on existing war memorials and coming up with something new. And I don't think we mentioned polychromy, which is really Mykola's topic, which is worked on quite a lot. And maybe he'll talk more about it. But what I find interesting here is that there is this very specifically Ukrainian tradition of polychrome repainting of war memorials, and the Russians initially were against it, but then they find it and they start to run with it, and they start to claim that it's their own practice, right? And in the end, these repainted monuments look very different, or sometimes you even have bronze monuments that they start repainting or kind of filing down. So it does look different. It is an evolution compared to the Soviet period.
Mm. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll hope to read the book soon.
And don't forget about technologies. New technologies appeared in throughout the world, and Russians and Ukrainians use these technologies to make new monuments from plastic, using different new materials, technologies. For instance, it's very important in terms of time. It's very fast technology because, for instance, numerous monuments were erected in Russia-occupied Ukraine due to new possibilities to create something from plastic very quickly and install in occupied cities and towns.
Yeah, so this was the example of the grandma with the banner, right? So that was, I guess, it was turned into murals. I know that in Russia, they reproduced it on murals as a kind of iconic image. And then, I was amused to find an example of the 3D version of that as a monument in your book. So was it like a 3D printer, or how did they make it? Or it was like a mold that they used to do it?
I mean, it's made of polymer, so I'm not exactly sure about the details of the process, but I can show an image.
Yeah, please.
Can you see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, so that's what it looked like. And these are also the kinds of statues that you now find in cemeteries, for example. So it's kind of a standard technique of the sculptural industry. And this is the Alexander Nevsky statue that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, there's no limit to bad taste.
Right. And this one is I think cast iron and was produced in St. Petersburg.
Yes, and I should mention that the online version, the downloadable version of the book has color photographs, which is really amazing. And thank you so much, Mykola, for taking pictures at the risk to your life and freedom. So we definitely are beneficiaries of this amazing work of scholarship and passion. And I'm just really blown away by the scope and the depth of this book. And my heartfelt thanks to you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you indeed. Thank you.
And
we have
thanks
any
to the
questions?
Austrian Science Fund, which gave us
yes,
some money
yes.
to be able to include color illustrations, also in the printed version.
And yes, and it's amazing that I don't know who's responsible for the open access. If the publisher does that routinely, or it is one of the institutions.
No. Once again, we got money. I mean, that was the grant from the Austrian Science Fund, which funded me for 2 years in Vienna, and then they gave us an additional grant for open access and for color illustrations.
That's how it should be, really, for all books. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much, Mykola, Mischa, Yuliya, everybody who is here present. Tell your friends and your students that we have this book that is available, and that you can watch the video of this seminar at your leisure, and will be available fairly soon. I think also I should mention the blog, the PoSoCoMeS blog, where we started interviewing scholars whose books we're discussing, as a kind of, doing interviews where they answer a few questions about the origins of the book, and about the main takeaways and so forth. So please use this as a resource for educating your students and sharing with colleagues, and talk it up broadly at a dinner table. Thanks so much, and have a great week, everyone, and see you in Europe, at conferences, wherever we might meet.
Thanks
Bye
for
for
having us.
now.
Thank you. Thank you.